Hello, everybody. Hope you all can hear me all right. Uh, just to start off, thank you to ADL for putting on this series of webinars, and thank you to the team at Yet Analytics, who has worked for the past 2 seasons on Dave, the data analytics and visualization environment for XAPI. Today, we will be showing you the state of the beta of Dave. Dave officially goes into beta on March 31st, so this is a preview a couple days early. So let's talk about what we're trying to do here. Basically, we are creating a set of open source specifications and an open source reference model software application for the purpose of demonstrating capabilities related to purpose-built XAPI analytics. One of the big differences between Dave and other analytics and visualization applications is that from the ground up, all of Dave is specifically built for XAPI data. The purpose here is that an end user should be able to query an XAPI dataset ad hoc. So they should be able to use Dave to get an XAPI dataset from a learning record store and immediately start querying and creating visualizations from that dataset. Secondly, the data visualizations themselves can be understood as prototypes, although as you'll see, you can actually create pretty refined data reports even in the reference model application. But these prototype visualizations then in the third stage can be exported as the code resulting of the query plus the transform into a visualization. That code is portable and can be shipped in JSON or EDN. Why are we doing this? So most query languages are dependent upon proprietary databases. And in an effort to increase interoperability and keep with the spirit of the XAPI community and the needs of DoD stakeholders, we want to create an extensible and interoperable method of XAPI query and visualization. So Dave will be able to be used with any LRS, no matter the underlying database properties of that LRS. So what's the problem? XAPI's novel semantic schema does not align well to existing commercial off-the-shelf analytic solutions. So if you've ever tried using XAPI data with a commercial solution like Power BI or Tableau, you find yourself in a situation where you have to flatten the data into CSV or something similar in order to work with it within the visualization application. And therefore, the methods of analysis, they tend to bypass the attributes of XAPI that actually make it unique. The goal here is to get around this problem by actually delivering a software specification and application that can utilize all of those unique attributes of XAPI in the way that it's meant to be used without having to adapt it into a format like CSV. So today, XAPI is, as mentioned, either transformed into CSV and used in a standard reporting or business intelligence data viz tool, or code can be written directly for one-to-one relationships between a research question and an analysis. But that code tends to be very brittle in that the questions tend not to have a one-to-many relationship, and therefore they become very labor intensive, where an analyst needs to write custom queries every time for each research question. The third way is a reliance on the query languages of proprietary databases. This is a case where within the packaging of an LRS, say like a commercial LRS, you may have a query engine that is utilizing the database capabilities that the LRS itself is extending. The issue there is that if for any reason you don't want to use the database that the LRS is using, or you want to shift from one LRS to another LRS and the underlying databases are different, the queries and visualizations that you've created from one report to the next may be difficult to use. Lastly, in standard sort of administrative dashboards that can exist on an LRS to tell you things like number of actors, number of statements within the LRS itself, those dashboards tend to be very highly opinionated. This is part of the reason why in much of the commercial space, there's so much customization done within dashboard tools, because the original stock opinionated dashboards created as the developers create them don't necessarily extend to all of the different use cases that a customer may have. All right, moving on. So what is new in our approach now? The approach of Dave is open source. Everything is licensed Apache 2.0. The Dave software application will run on any LRS. The query language is purpose-built for XAPI profiles, and the code is exportable to any other application. So what's the research behind this? In 2019, our team issued a report introducing a language for defining the functionality of learning analytics algorithms in terms of operations, primitives, and algorithms. These definitions were used to create algorithms corresponding to an initial set of learning analytics questions. So the way that we started the research was by gathering research questions specifically related to problems in the learning domain, and then attempting to write queries against those questions. What we found was that because of the attributes of XAPI, this could sort of best be considered by breaking everything down into the most primitive operations that could be done that would essentially allow us to create building blocks up to answering a question. And those individual building blocks could be reused and remixed for other questions. In this way, what we tried to do was to solve for that brittleness problem that I described before, where in our initial attempts, we were answering questions, but they had a very one-to-one relationship, and the attributes of the algorithms that we were building to answer the questions did not necessarily translate or extend to other questions that we and other analyses. So what we wanted to do was create a way to approach this more as building blocks that could be modular and that could be mixed and reused. So we then calibrated the technical requirements of a purpose-built XAPI query system against the templates comprised of those algorithms. So initially saying, given the algorithms that we're creating that have this building block type structure to them, what are the sort of technical requirements necessary for a system to support these? The technical requirements informed the foundational set of operations and transforms, which Dave was built to implement. The foundational set was used as the basis for identifying appropriate open source means of implementing transforms in the beta reference model. So additionally, what we wanted to do was rather than in the context of a TRL4 to TRL5 project, rather than completely build a completely new database system from the ground up. Instead, what we wanted to do was leverage open source platforms that could be appended to and augmented to provide for the transforms needed within the Dave environment, but as specifically applied to XAPI data. The beta has provided us with insight into what is necessary now to transition Dave capabilities into the operational domain. So the solution, Dave, or the data and visualization environment for XAPI is comprised of open source analytics, the ability to use these with any LRS, and the ability to deploy to a browser or a server. The reference model software application that we'll be demonstrating is all within the browser. And we have some future considerations for application within enterprise environments. So how does it all work? So this is a view into a Dave workbook. A little bit later in the presentation, I'll be doing a live demonstration, but I wanted to sort of walk you through what the different parts of Dave are. So in Dave, we have three sections in terms of sort of a hierarchy. We have, and at the top in the lighter blue on the left-hand side, you see library. So the library is the largest container. within the library, you have workbooks to the right. And then within workbooks, you have multiple analyses. So what we're looking at on this screen is one single analysis, which exists within a workbook called TC3 Simulated Activity. And that workbook lives within my analytics library. On the left, we have a query editor. This is where I'm able to write a query against my XAPI dataset. I can import saved queries, and I can export the query that I write to libraries or other places where I'm sharing my queries with other analysts on my team. I'm also able to select templates. One of the things that we would like to see happen over time is the development of shared enterprise scale libraries of templates, both for queries and visualizations, that I could search through, look for use cases similar to my own, so that I don't always have to start from scratch. Below the query editor, we have the visualization code editor. Here, I can also select a template for my visualization code. I can import code or export it out to share. On the right, we have the prototyping environment for the data visualization itself. And there, we're able to run the data viz. We're able to export the visualization as a static picture, and we're able to export the visualization code itself, which makes the entire process from query to custom visualization editing to the running and production of the visualization itself entirely exportable and shareable. The way that we have implemented the visualization code in the reference model is using the open source Vega specification. All of the elements that we've built and appended upon are open source. You can switch in your preferred visualization grammar as required. You would just have to adjust accordingly. So right now, the technology is up to the level of TRL 5. Dave is custom designed for XAPI. The query language has been augmented specific to XAPI attributes, and the visualization editor, the transforms that come through there take that into account. Additionally, Dave itself is designed to be part of a total learning architecture deployment. So it can serve as the analytics engine and visualization prototyping tool for dashboards within the TLA. Dave is a learning record consumer. In XAPI language, we have learning record consumers, we have learning record providers, which are data sources. We have learning record stores, which validate and store data. And we have learning record consumers, which pull data from a learning record store. That's where Dave fits in. It's a learning record consumer. The Dave data reference model runs in a browser. Note that this reference model was not intended for large data sets, but rather to illustrate functionality. Dave, as we'll discuss, can be configured to run very large persistent enterprise data sets, but for the purposes of a reference model showing basic capabilities, the Dave beta reference model is designed for smaller data sets. Dave leverages the Dave specification for learning analytics algorithms. We'll look at this in a moment. This is the original research document that lays out the language for describing all of the necessary parts of a learning analytics algorithm for the purpose of working within Dave. Dave's custom query interface leverages Datalog. This is an open source logical query language. It's commonly used with deductive database systems. Datalog will be recognizable and similar to anyone who's used to working with SQL. XAPI attributes are programmed directly into Dave, into the query syntax, and can be used in queries to address specific elements of a statement. So as we'll see in the next slide, I believe, all of the possible attributes of an XAPI statement are baked directly into the query mechanism within Dave, and I'm able to easily swap out for what it is that I'm looking for in my query. The Dave beta reference model leverages Vega, as we mentioned. This is an open source visualization grammar. This is our preference for the reference model, though any data viz library may be implemented. As I've mentioned, Dave fully supports all of the attributes of XAPI. So from your basic actor verb objects through all of your context, score, result, and substatement and extension attributes within an XAPI statement, they are all queryable through Dave. And Dave natively supports a variety of math functions. These functions can be used within the queries to transform values using the math transform syntax that's been designed for Dave. So the intent here is to provide a great deal of flexibility in terms of being able to reach deep into any aspect of an XAPI statement and to have an extendable range of functions for the purpose of querying that material. So why does this matter? Who cares? We think that for DoD learning and training stakeholders, the benefits of being analytics agnostic, in other words, being able to use Dave to query XAPI data from the LRS of any vendor or any custom deployment. The advantage of being able to prototype data viz immediately, and the advantage of all of the system being open source. This provides great value and benefit to DoD learning and training stakeholders. Namely, Dave improves costs because it's freely available open source, it's LRS agnostic, and it is extensible to any implementation of the TLA, so long as TLA components within the learning record providers are producing conformant XAPI to the learning record stores located either on the edges or in the center of the architecture. Dave can be used to provide analytics and visualization capabilities into that data. Secondly, time. Queries and resulting data viz can be run ad hoc within the semantic context of XAPI. So you get full use of XAPI at your fingertips. There's no need to transform the XAPI data in order to make it useful to the enterprise data science capability. This has long been an issue within XAPI, the matter of having to transform XAPI data into other formats just to be able to use it. Dave alleviates that issue. And lastly, efficiency. Dave queries and the resulting data visualization code can be saved and shared. In a future iteration, we'd like to see a searchable library of Dave code filtered by domain and use case. This could provide analytics capability across the enterprise. For example, you could imagine a scenario where someone in Navy aviation has a course on mechanics for engine mechanics, and they do a number of reports based on that course, and then store and share the code that underlies those reports in an open library for DoD stakeholders. Someone from our Army aviation comes along, finds that they have similar issues that they need to report on. They look at the prior example, they make a new version of it, remix and set it up to their exact needs, issue their report, and then push back the new version of the code to the library. It becomes a sort of a versioning system that is searchable and usable by analysts across the DoD. In terms of the Dave research and resources, there are three resources available on GitHub that I would point you towards. The first is the Dave Learning Analytics Algorithms. This is the master document that establishes the language of Dave and formed the first part of our research. The second is the document on operations, primitives, and algorithms. This is a concise document that defines the functional requirements for Dave algorithms. And the last part is on Dave queries. This explains the query syntax for XAPI filtering aggregates and transformations within Dave. Where we are currently in the R&D lifecycle, we did the alpha in 2020. The alpha was, pardon me, I have my dates wrong here. We did the alpha in 2018, and that alpha was comprised of investigation into how to adequately provide queries against research questions within the context of XAPI analytics. That then led to the work that we did over the past year in the development of this beta. And where we would like to go in the future would be towards TRL 6, where we would like to see enterprise use, where Dave may be deployed on servers, the modifications required to the existing code base. We'd want to explore the development of a horizontally scalable query processing solution on the server side to account for the kind of massive volume that we would expect, the need to provide a variety of extensions for the math functions to increase extensibility, and the need to make a client-server model between the data viz and the query processing. All of the logic necessary to do these things is present in the current open source beta. So in a push towards where we want to go, it's really a matter of rearranging necessary functions of a browser-based reference model to the necessary functions of an enterprise deployment. Dave is licensed Apache 2 and is available on GitHub. So now what I'd like to do is show you a demonstration of Dave itself. All right, so we are here in a Dave library. As we saw before, the library consists of workbooks, and then within each of those workbooks, I have analyses. So you can see here that I have one analysis in each of these workbooks. So for those of you who were here 2 weeks ago when we took a look at Datasim, we created a simulated data set of a subset of profile, XAPI profile that was created for the tactical combat casualty care curriculum. And I will pull that up over here. You can see that I pull that data set from the LRS, and now I open it within the analysis view. Within the analysis view, I'm going to just start here with, I'll select a template to see where we were last time. So let's look at learner engagement. Here from that template, I've got different possibilities baked in. I chose learner engagement. That brings up my query that's baked in for learner engagement. I'll select a way to look at that. We'll do a descending view of our top 10 for learner engagement. And that popped up over here on the right. Everything is completely manipulable within the code editors. So here I'll just make it bigger, and I can see here that now what I've got is a visualization providing information on which actors in my LRS from that TC3 course were most engaged. Likewise, if I wanted to switch that around, say in my template, I just want to see, let's look at the bottom. So there, I'll pull the bottom of it. That's run. And again, if I want to just change the way it looks, I can adjust that directly into the editor. And now what I've got, these were my bottom least engaged actors. I can export these as pings or SVGs. So here is the SVG that I just made. go back over here, and I can also export the visualization code now that is comprised of the query plus the code, export that over here. So here we've got my visualization code, which I can share as I like. All right, so let's look at some more examples. I think what I'll do is I will start a workbook completely fresh, because this is one that we were working on last time when we showed Dataset. One more thing I should show actually before I do that is down here on the bottom, we have an advanced tool. The advanced tool will show me how the bindings and visualization fields are constructed, what it's pulling from my query, and will show me the examples that are being pulled from the LRS. But let's go ahead and start one from scratch. So I'll go back to my library and I will open up a new workbook. I will title this workbook Demo March 2020 and give it a description. Okay, so my new workbook has opened up and I have some choices as to where I want to get data from. There are existing reference model test data sets within the application. I can also pull data directly from an LRS. I'm going to use this one here in the middle. So you can see that that data set just loaded up over here. If I wanted to change it, I could just go right back here. I could choose to pull it directly from an LRS, or I could choose an alternate data set. I'm just going to stick with this one. So we've got our data set, and I want to do a new analysis. So that will open up a blank analysis view. Within that, the first thing I'm going to do is to select a template for a query. So I will select learner's score timeline, and that provides my my query. And then I'm going to let's turn this into a scatter plot. So I've run that visualization. I have a scatter plot of my learner scores over time. And let's make this a little bit bigger so we can look at it. So here we've got our scatter plot, and I could share this via the export features as a ping or an SVG like we saw before, or that code which includes my query. There are other templates available. We have learner engagement. This is similar to what we saw on the TC3 example. Here I've run learner engagement with my top learners going on down. I have a query in here for task determination. And here what I'm looking for is a certain number of times that someone may fail at an activity, but repeatedly do it until they are successful at the activity. So here, let's go ahead and look at that. And I can see this person here showed the greatest degree of task determination among my population. We can look at activity itself. So these are the actual activities that are occurring, whereas before we were looking at the actors. So here I can see that my activity called delivering the coquilla value is the most engaged with activity, piece of content in my LRS. And then down here, you can see, an individual page of a piece of content is lower than that. I also have the ability within templates to look for things like raw score by actors on specific activities. So here I know that one of my activities, so I've got a list of my activities. I'm going to put one of them in here. So this was the activity that I think was at the bottom of what we saw on the last visualization. All right, and let's go ahead and take a look at what we've got there. There we've run the visualization, and we can see our actors, who in this case, these were their raw scores on that individual activity. So you can see we've got 100 points possible. These were the scores that they had. If I wanted to look at who were my bottom actors, I can see here this person, they scored 30 points on theirs. So very quickly on an assessment by assessment basis, I'm able to graph out sort of the complete experience on assessment that my learners have had. We can also take a look. We'll do this one. This is so this is we're going to look at scaled scores by hour of day, and then we're going to do a regression across the time series. So here's our regression. Let's see if we can make this a little bit more readable. Okay, so what we had here, this is over the hours of a day. These were my scaled scores. So it looks here that, in generally speaking, the later into the evening that people are working lower scores, higher scores around midday. So these are the types of things that we could do. If we, for instance, wanted to change this up and say, okay, well, that's scale, but just straight up raw scores, what kind of numbers are we getting? I can do that directly within the same visualization. So all of those types of visualization are available as templates, and then I'm able to use the query syntax both to adjust what I'm looking for as well as how I'm looking for it, and then the way that I'm visualizing that using the visualization grammar. All right, so going to so I'm going to go over here to GitHub and show you the stuff that we have available here. So within Dave, you have immediate access to the master doc. This is the master doc that was created as the original research project into what kind of language would suffice for this type of analytics environment. Secondly, you have the document for the introduction to the operations, primitives, and algorithms. This will provide you with the most succinct definition into what that terminology means with regards to the Dave project. Then you have the Dave queries themselves. These are all of the XAPI attributes that you may include within a query. And these are the math functions which you can include to transform values within the query. So we'll go back to this and say that this project has been a lot of fun to work on. A lot of great people, both at ADL and at Yet, have come together over the past 2 seasons to get this thing into the beta format that it is today. I'd like to thank everyone who made that possible, and I'd like to thank all of you for attending the webinar. I believe we've got some time for questions, which I'd be happy to answer now. Over to you, Liz.
Okay, all right, thanks, Shelly. We've got about 10 minutes, so we'll try to answer as many questions as we can in that time. Some of these questions were from earlier in the presentation, so Shelly, if you've already answered it and I missed it, just let me know and we can go next, okay?
Sure thing.
All right, so the first one is, are you considering runtime processing of XAPI into learner knowledge models?
I would say that that would be an application of where the Dave query language could be useful within the scope of what we're trying to do, and just these getting Dave to TRL6 that is outside scope.
Okay. All right, next question is, this one seems like a plug, maybe. Is Dave query language similar to Veracity's VQL?
I don't want to speak for them. I don't know. I've described Dave pretty well. I don't know what they're doing.
Okay, next. What are transforms?
This is where you are transforming the ask of a query into the visualization code that then you can edit and turn into your prototype data visualization.
All right, thanks. Is Dave currently planned to be part of or a subset of TLA?
Yes, Dave is available as an analytics engine resource within the TLA and a data visualization prototyping tool for data flowing through the TLA.
Thanks. All right. Are there any limitations to which LRSs can be used with Dave? For example, if an LRS didn't support the basic authorization convention?
Dave will work with any LRS that has been that has successfully passed the ADL XAPI LRS test suite.
All right. Is there any plan to add a procedural UI for the visualization code editor?
We've got like 10,000 things that we would like to do, including some HTML5 stuff within the visualization itself, so you can interact with it in a more immediate way. Ultimately, I'd like this to be something where we could make the custom queries available to people who wanted them. But we could also make it so that if I pulled something out of a library and I was not maybe as sophisticated a technical user, I could still work with and manipulate the visualization for a report. So I think that this gets to the question of like, what do you provide for technical users? What do you provide for business users? And I think that if we want to mature Dave, we would really like to explore putting more time into outcome and UI for the business user experience. Now, saying that, originally when we started Dave, we went at it from that angle, where we really thought about this as sort of a business UI. There would be sort of a library of learning domain questions. I could look for my question and then manipulate a data visualization based on that. And we developed that as far as we thought it was feasible. But there were, like I said early in the presentation, what wound up happening was that individual queries and the resulting visualizations were so brittle and so dependent upon the one-to-one relationship between that code and that individual research question that it wasn't very usable. You had to basically start from scratch every time. Hopefully, the development of the primitives language within Dave now provides more modularity and more ability to create one-to-many formats, which now down the road may mean better accessibility for business users. But we have to transition to get there.
All right. Good answer. Ready? And the next one is, who is the using target audience? Most SMEs in the education and training areas are not analysts or comfortable with changing code. Is there a differing user interface plan?
Yeah, that gets to sort of the prior question. What you see here is an interface that's meant for analysts. These would be, and by analysts, I'm sort of saying that with a lowercase a. Anyone who is comfortable writing a SQL query should be pretty comfortable doing this. It's understood that that may not be applicable currently to the widest range of business users. But now that we do have that capability, now we would be interested in building out the business user UI capability. all of this also, it should be remembered that Dave, the reference model implementation is only that. It's just a reference model. It's one implementation of what you're able to do with the Dave resources. Because it's completely open source, if anyone within this community wanted to create a business user interface, you're more than welcome to share it within the Dave open source community, and we can go from there. I think that's one of the big advantages of this being an open source project. But just from a purely scope and sequencing point of view, it made the most sense to us, especially after our initial frustrations. It made the most sense to get get everything in place with what an analyst would need to actually create queries, and then build the business use out of that.
Okay. Looks like maybe we've got time for maybe one more question. So let's see about this one. Is Dave possible to be connected with Moodle? Are there any limitations?
So, yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. I think that, so you'll remember that within XAPI, you have learning record providers, learning record stores, and learning record consumers. Dave is a learning record consumer, meaning that it is going to connect to an LRS, and it's going to pull data from the LRS so that you can do queries and visualizations of that data. Moodle, whether you have a native plugin that you build in Moodle or something like that, that's going to be a learning record provider. That XAPI plugin is going to help you to create Moodle activity or events in XAPI conformant format, which then are validated and stored by the LRS. So all of this is a really long way to say that the way to think about this question shouldn't be, can we connect the LRC directly to the LRP, right? Can we connect Dave directly to Moodle? Rather, it should be, can we connect Dave to an LRS? And can we connect Moodle or any other LRP to an LRS? And once the data is validated and stored within the LRS, then we're able to pull it into Dave. So I would say that Moodle vis-a-vis a XAPI plugin can connect to an LRS, therefore you can use it with Dave. Likewise, any other application that either natively or through some sort of translation or middleware, any application that can produce XAPI data and send it to the LRS, that data can be used by Dave.
All right. Actually, I think that also looks like perfect timing for the end of the webinar. So thank you so much, Shelley. Do you have any last words of wisdom for our listeners?
Thank you all. Thank you for both working with and being interested in XAPI. And please reach out. You have my email address here, shelley@yetanalytics.com. If you would like to be involved in developing for the open source Dave project, please leave comments or issues on GitHub, and looking forward to working with you all.
All right, thank you, Shelley. And if you didn't come in right at the beginning of the webinar, as a reminder, this webinar was recorded and you will receive a recording of it in your inbox with the email that you signed up with. And check the ADL Initiative social media and website for more webinar recordings. Thanks so much, Shelley, and everybody, thanks for joining us and thanks for your questions, and have a great day.